All right, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a very articulate way of describing an opinion and also stating some facts of what is permitted in the Bible. Okay, since we're talking about whether or not God condones slavery, I want to make sure I'm clear. I do not believe that God condones what is understood as being immoral slavery. Okay, and again, I want to see somebody prove that that's the case. Until the discussion starts, there's really nothing else to say.
Is there a moral form of slavery?
Yeah.
If you could elaborate on that.
Okay. First of all, indentured servitude, if a person willfully goes into it. There's national laws that was made for the nation of Israel. There are national laws that was made for the nation of Israel that was set up for restitution when you owe the debt. And that's a little hint for us going forward, as punishment and as a way to provide for your family. And slavery existed in wartime. So instead of wiping out the entire populace, and all the ancient Near East nations practiced this, they would keep some of the people for themselves to bring them into their nation. Kind of what we do today, but I don't want to get too far because we certainly condone it today.
I don't think that we do. I mean, we've, as an entire population in the world, we have, thoroughly renounced the whole idea of slavery in general. And if I'm not mistaken, and maybe Dr. Josh can correct me, but it wasn't just in wartime that the Israelites could get slaves. I mean, they could purchase slaves from the nations around them. This is not just like, oh, the Israelites are going to go and kill all these people in the city and then take all the slaves forcefully, and take them as like prisoners of war or to be turned into slaves. I mean, they could literally just go to the next country over and purchase a bunch of slaves and then come right back with these foreign slaves, and instead of like enslaving, the people around them, their neighbors. So, I mean,
can I respond?
Yeah, go on ahead, Vaco.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Again, what you don't want to do though is you don't want to make it again. What you're doing is you're excluding the part where God condemns the act of man stealing. Okay, so what you don't see is God commanding the Israelites to go into a foreign country that doesn't adhere to any aspect of the Mosaic law and just take them captive arbitrarily. You don't see any of that. What you're doing is you're looking at these issues where slave trade, if you will, is being made between Israel and another nation or whatever. But that's not Israel going over there, forcing them into slavery against these people's will. Okay, that's I would look at that as some form of economic issue there at the time. And the other issue is as well, again, I think GMan, you might have brought it up already. I mean, the way these slaves are treated. Again, I think what we need to do is to get out of our heads the modern version of slavery, which is they're thinking of LeVar Burton, who played Kunta Kinte in the movie Roots, and they're thinking of 12 Years a Slave. They're thinking of all these movies where slaves, black people being whipped and stuff like that because they disobeyed white men's rules and stuff like that. No, that's not anything that's propagated or expressed in the Bible. If you do see an example of that, that would be somebody violating God's commands, so on and so forth. But again, what you're talking about, Godless Engineer, is again, it's just a simply a form of some sort of economic trade, if you will. It wasn't, the Israelites violating any of God's commands.
Josh, would you like to address that in particular or anything?
I mean, so honestly, it sounds like the four of us are closer than I anticipated that we'd be, like on what we think the Hebrew Bible is actually saying, which is great. I think the one thing that concerns me, not necessarily just in this discussion, but in these discussions in general, is when we think about, and I am no expert in the antebellum. Sorry, Robbie. I am no expert in the Antebellum South. But like Thomas Morris wrote a book. There are a couple others I could pull off the shelf. I can't remember the guys that wrote them. But one of the things that I was curious about a year ago when I started talking about this was, it's absolutely true that the Hebrew Bible, particularly passages like Exodus 21, verses 20 to 21, that's not like, it's not meant to be a manual on how you can like get away with beating your slave within an inch of his life and, walk away chuckling or something, right? The whole point there is to say, and as we see in like Proverbs 29, we know that masters are going to beat slaves with wooden rods. I mean, that's what's encouraged in the Proverbs. But be careful how you do it is the point of Exodus 21. Because if you do anything more than what I think we would consider moderate correction, there can be some dire consequences for that. So one of the things that I found interesting is when you look at the laws that we're obtaining in both the more post-revolutionary antebellum South, but even in colonial periods, the laws were actually very similar. So like you can read about, no, I won't talk for much longer, but you can read about like Judge Ruffin, who goes to great lengths to try to explain why it's okay and necessary that masters in the South be able to beat their slaves and to do this moderate correction, or even a third party that's placed in charge of a slave, that you have to be able to beat them, right? And even that's necessary in order to keep good correction in his statements on the judiciary. But you can't just murder them, right? You can't just kill us. In fact, if you kill a slave, particularly post-revolution, Virginia, I think Tennessee, Georgia, the penalty was as if you killed a free white man, right? But of course, we all know that that's not how it played out, right? So there was a difference between what the law stipulated and what actually took place, as we all know from these, like these things you're describing. And I think the same is true in the Hebrew Bible. So if you go to places like Jeremiah 34 and Nehemiah 5, you see the law not being followed there. So we have to make sure that we draw a distinction between what the law is called for in both the Antebellum South and in the Hebrew Bible, and what was actually practiced, and not make comparisons between law and practice or law and practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Just, but what you're kind of getting at here is that the antebellum chattel slavery is very, very close to the slavery that was experienced in the Old Testament that is being described. Is that true or no?
I mean, I would say we have to compare apples to apples. So if we're looking at the laws, and that's really the thing that I think is important. The reason that I think looking at the laws is important is because you can see not only a common state of mind or a common legal rationale for both in like Exodus 21 and what you see like in Virginia post-revolution. And that scares me a little because, we know what actually took place, right? We know what actually came about in the Antebellum South, what developed from that, and how those laws actually acted as terrible loopholes, right, to the people, because, not nobody, but far fewer people than we would like were actually prosecuted for just, because there were these loopholes, ways to kind of get out of these sorts of things. So I don't think that we should draw such. There obviously are differences, but not as many as we might like to think in the laws, if that makes sense. And to be wary of that, because The old saying, those that forget the past are doomed to repeat it. That's the sort of thing that I think we should all be wary of as a society.
Showing the differences between the laws then and the laws now, and how there was more what you could get away with in the South, even though the law was stated there. It wasn't enforced as much, but with the Bible, because it came from God, the laws were there. They were enforced by the other people around, regardless.
But they weren't. I mean, I think this is the issue. And now I'll stop talking. But like Jeremiah 34, this was the whole point, is that the people kept their slaves past the 7-year period, right? And then they released them, and then they had the ability to just go take them back, right? And that was all against the law to do that. So it's